Welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at the building blocks of AWS. So we're going to look at things like availability zones and regions. So just what we're going to look at in this lesson, we're going to start with the AWS global infrastructure. We'll then explore what availability zones are, what data centers are, what regions are, what edge locations are. And then we're going to go in and have a look at the AWS Management Console as it looks today. So let's start with the AWS global infrastructure. And the global infrastructure is split between regions and availability zones. And at the time of recording, there's 31 regions and 99 availability zones. Now, this will change all the time. You'll never be tested on how many regions or availability zones there are in the exams. What you will be tested on is the differences between regions and availability zones. So it's really important to understand the difference. So what is a region? Let's start with that because it's probably the simplest. A region is simply a location. So it could be London, it could be Cape Town, it could be Sydney, it could be Northern Virginia, etc. It's a physical location. So you might then be wondering, well, what's an availability zone? Well, think of an availability zone as a data center. Now, if you haven't worked in tech before, if you've never been to a data center, you might be wondering what a data center is. Well, a data center is simply a building that's filled with servers. That's all it is. It's a building with rows and rows and rows of servers. They're all inside data halls, and you have multiple data halls per data center, depending on the data center architecture. Now, an availability zone may be several different data centers, but because they're close together, they'll be within a certain mile radius between each one. They'll be counted as one availability zone. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's just one data center. It's always going to be multiple data centers, but they will be close enough together to be grouped into one availability zone. So what's a region? Well, we covered it off, but a region is just a geographical area, and each region consists of two or more availability zones. So in this region, we've got three availability zones. We've got availability zone A, availability zone B, availability zone C, etc., etc. So if you Google regions and availability zones with AWS, you'll get the following landing page. And you can see here we've got all the different regions inside North America. And you can click up here and see it inside South America, Europe and the Middle East, and Asia Pacific. So there are regions and availability zones everywhere. So if we go over to North America, we can scroll down here and we can see that US East 1 is Northern Virginia. So this has 6 availability zones in it, and it was launched in 2006. And we can scroll down and have a read about our availability zones. You see here right at the end, it says availability zones are physically separated by a meaningful distance of many kilometers from any other availability zone, although all are within 100 kilometers or 60 miles of each other. So every availability zone, so take, for example, in here we've got 6 availability zones. They'll all be within 60 miles or 100 kilometers of each other because they're in the Northern Virginia region. So that's how availability zones work. And you'll notice here we've got edge locations, and you'll notice our edge locations, we've got many more than we do have regions, and you can actually see the edge locations listed here for North America. So what are edge locations? Well, an edge location are basically just endpoints for AWS that are used for caching content. And typically this consists of things like CloudFront, which is Amazon's content delivery network, which we're going to learn about a little bit later on in the course. Essentially, all you need to know going into your exam is that there are many more edge locations than there are regions. And currently there are over 215 edge locations around the world. So that's all an edge location is. So these are all the different service types that sit on top of the AWS global infrastructure. And I'm not going to read them all out, but there's an awful lot. And these are the service types. So these are actually just the groups. Underneath each of these service types, you have individual services. So it can get a little bit overwhelming. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at the Amazon Management Console when I first started. So I first started learning AWS in about 2014 is when I started really looking at it. And this is what it looked like in 2014. That was very simple. So we had compute services, storage and content delivery services, database services, networking services, etc., etc. And under compute, we only had 2 services. We had EC2 and Lambda. Or under storage, content, and delivery, we just had 4 services. So we had S3, Storage Gateway, Glacier, and CloudFront. Let's have a look at what the AWS Management Console looks like today. So this is what the AWS console looks like today. And if I click up here and I go to services, you can see all the different services down here. If I click on compute, you can see there's a lot more than just two. So we've got AWS App Runner, Batch, EC2 Image Builder, Elastic Beanstalk, Lambda, Lightsail, AWS Outpost, Serverless Application Repository, and AWS SIM Space Weaver. And I can't even say it all in one breath. And there'll always be more and more services added to the console. The great thing is about this course is you don't need to know every service at all in order to pass the exam. We will just be focusing on the core services that you need to know to pass the Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam. Now, I'm a huge SpaceX fan. This is a real picture. This is a picture of Elon Musk's Roadster orbiting the Earth. It was launched by the Falcon Heavy. I was actually lucky enough to be at that launch with my son. And I want you to look at the center console of the Roadster, and it says "Don't Panic," and that is from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams' famous book. So when you're looking at the AWS console and you saw all those different services, please don't panic. You only need to know a few of those services to pass your exam. You certainly don't need to know all of those services in depth. To be honest, there's quite a few services that are there that I don't even know what they do. They're just names to me. So you'll never know all services inside out with AWS. It's just too vast. But if we had a look at the different service types that you need to know in order to pass your exam, it's going to be these ones. So start from the bottom. Compute is a massive area, and we will cover that in a lot of detail. Same with storage and databases. They are the bread and butter of the Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam. You also need to know migration and transfer, network and content delivery, a little bit of management and governance, analytics, security, identity, and compliance, which is the very first service we're going to cover off in the next section. We then have application integration, AWS cost management, and containers. So you really just need to know these different service types in order to pass your exam. You don't need to know things like quantum technologies or satellite or blockchain or robotics. That's just not covered in the Solutions Architect Associate exam. So please don't panic. We're going to make it super easy. We're going to cover each service type individually, and then we're going to drill down into each individual service in depth, and you'll learn everything that you need to know in order to pass your exam. So at the end of every lecture, we're going to have our exam tips, and we're just going to reinforce what you've learned in the end of each lecture. So in this lecture, let's have a look at what we learned about. So we learned that a region is a physical location in the world that consists of two or more availability zones. An availability zone is one or more discrete data centers, each with redundant power, networking, and connectivity, which can sometimes be housed in separate facilities. And then we have our edge locations, which are endpoints for AWS that are used for caching content. And typically this consists of CloudFront, which is Amazon's content delivery network, and we will cover that off in more detail as we go on for the rest of the course. So that is it for this lecture, everyone. You've done really well. Congratulations on passing your first lecture. Do you have any questions? Please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.